everyone, and welcome to Girly and Yarny. I'm Milena, and for today's video I will be indirect warping my rigid Heddle Loom. So let's get started. I've promised in another video that I will be showing you the two ways I warp my loom. So I already have a video on how I direct warp my loom. Here it is. But I haven't come around yet to make you the video on how I indirect warp my loom. To be completely honest, this is not a technique that I use the most often. Every time I can, I like to use the direct method way. But for some reason, sometimes it makes more sense for me to just indirect warp my loom. So I want to show you how I do it. I would like also to note that since I don't do it as often as the other technique, I don't have as many tricks to share with you, but still I hope you will understand how I do it and maybe give it a go yourself. But before going any further, I need to warn you guys that the method showed here to warp a loom is not considered a beginner method. If you are just starting a rigid Heddle loom, I don't recommend trying to indirect warp your loom at first. I think the direct method way is much easier to understand to start with. But if you're interested into learning more about this technique, just keep watching, and I hope that you will still try it one day. For this video, I want to start by talking more about what equipment you will need to do this. I'm going to tell you more about what equipment I have to do it also, and then I will tell you a bit more about the advantages of doing indirect warping and also the disadvantages. So there's no method that is the perfect one, but it's a good alternatives in some situations. And then we'll just get started warping this loom. To do indirect warping, you will need what is called a warping board. So basically what a warping board is a rectangle frame with holes in it in which we put pegs in them, and we use this equipment to make the warp onto the board, and then we take the warp and we put it onto the loom. So this is why it is called indirect warping, because we don't do the process of warping is then made on the loom basically. So the whole warp is being made onto this board and then it is transposed onto the loom. But luckily for me, my loom can double up as one warping board. So I have a 32 inches wide Ashford loom, and they came with the add-on holes in them. I believe that the oldest version did not have them, but this is a newer version, so it has it. When I bought it, only the 32 inches and the 48 inches had the holes in them, but now I believe that every new model, no matter the size of it, would have those holes there. So all you need to do is buy an extra set of pegs. It doesn't come with the loom, so you need to buy the extra, and then you can put them in the holes, and now you have a warping board. So that's a very nice trick to have, because you don't need to buy an extra warping board, so you're saving on money and also on space. So there's a few reasons why one would prefer doing indirect warping instead of direct warping. So the first one for me is if I'm doing a very long warp, then I definitely prefer to do it here than to have to walk all the way through the home. And I'm lucky enough because I have quite a lot of space in my dining room to do my direct warping. But if I were to live in the tightest place, then I would probably prefer doing indirect warping because I wouldn't have as much space to do the direct warping method. Also, it happens to me sometimes I just don't feel like walking around the house. Sometimes my back hurts and I don't want to bend over all the time when I'm direct warping, so this could be an alternative. But still, this being said, we need to have a good setup because this can also be sometimes a bit hard on the back. This is why I want to show you more about how I am doing it, because I'm very lucky with my stand. But before I had my stand, I would be indirect warping while standing on the table, and it can become a little bit tiring doing it while standing on the table and being bent over the table. There are many people who just hang their board onto a wall and do it while standing up, so this can sometimes be a little bit easier on the body. but I'm very lucky because in my stand I can just lean my loom on it and I can do my warping there. So this stand was homemade by my partner and his father and it was not intended to allow me to do this but it turns out that it works also like this. So I just lean it over and it stays there. It's not super stable, but it doesn't need to be super stable to do this warping method. So it works fine, and I find it a bit easier on my back. When I need to go up to those two pegs here, sometimes I find a little far away, but it still works great for me. So I'm lucky for that. So personally, the biggest reason why I believe that this technique is not very beginner friendly, it's because it is not very straightforward if we compare it to direct warping. When we direct warp, we get quickly a sense of what we're doing. We see the warp forming on the loom in the heddle, so this helps understanding where we're going with that. When this will not be the case with indirect warping, so we will be winding a warp onto the board. I will be telling you I prefer doing it this way or that way for some reasons, and those reasons may be very obscure or abstract to you, but I assure you they make sense when we get the warp onto the loom or when you will try it yourself. But I know that it might sound like I'm doing witchcraft, so just winding warps onto pegs and then putting this onto a loom, but it works. This method really works. So now let's start with the calculation. We need to figure out how long we want the warp to be. So for today's project, I'm not doing a super long warp. I'm only doing one scarf. So my warp will be 2.5 meters. Then I will be warping for 18 inches wide, and I will be using my 7.5 Heddle. So for the length, we'll talk about it a bit later, but I really want to know how much ends there will be in this project. This will be important to make sure that I keep a good track of where I'm at while warping, so that I don't end up with a warp that is too narrow or too wide. So if I want to do 18 inches, so 18 inches times my 7.5 Heddle, which means there's 7.5 ends per inches, then that means that I have, and I really need my calculator for this, 18 times 7.5, this means that I will have 135 ends in total. So we will be winding the warp onto the warping board, so you will see threads floating around, going around the board repeatedly, but even though it might look like it's a little bit free-for-all, there really is an order, and this order is being taken care of by the crosses that we make in the warp. So I really want to show you precisely how I make those crosses, because those are really the most important part, especially the first one, in order to be able to put the warp onto the loom. So I will be doing this next part of the video. I will really focus into 3 different parts. So the first part will be basically how to find a path on the board and follow that path with the yarn. Then I will really put a lot of focus onto the first cross I'm making, and then I will focus on the second cross that I am making. And just note that even though I'm showing you those 3 steps separately, those 3 really they live together, and we usually do them simultaneously while we wind the warp onto the board. So without further ado, I feel like I've been talking way too much now. So let's jump in and let's start warping the loom. So first of all, I cut a piece of scrap yarn of the desired length of my warp. So I want my warp to be 2.5 meters. So this piece of yarn here is 2.5 meters. So what I want to do is I want to find a path on my loom to have this length, and I'm going to follow this path with my yarn for the warping. So here, let's try this, up until this. Alright, so this here is 2.5 meters of warp, so with my yarn I will follow this to make one thread, and the way back will be a second thread. So let's start this. So I take my yarn and I just make a little loop at the beginning. And I follow the exact same path as I did here. And I come back. So here, that is 2 threads of two ends for my warp. So I will be doing it one more time. And oh. To make the cross, my threads need to cross here, so to do this they will go around this piece at a different angle. So when the first warp thread that I use will go behind this third peg, and now I go all the way through, I come back, and now my second thread, the thread that comes back, if you want, will go, for this peg, will go in front of this peg, so like this. Now, I need to do another thread that will go behind this peg, and the next one, oops, will have to go in front, because we went behind for this one, so this one needs to go the other way around, so it needs to go in front, like this. So now let's focus a bit closely to the cross here, the first cross that I'm making. Here we can see by a cross it actually looks like an X, and it's very, very clear, so all the threads, they behave in one way, they are one on top of each other, and this is what's going to keep the order, which is important when we will be doing the other step of putting the warp onto the loom. So my last thread came here, so now my next one needs to go and do the cross on the other way around. There's many ways to look at it, but I like to look at it according to the third peg, how my warp thread goes around it, but we could still look at the second peg and be, well, I need to come back on the right side and then here on the left side. So this one is going this way. Now I'm going to go all the way through the board and back. So I came in this way, so the next one needs to come in the other way. So I need to go from the front side of the peg here, and let's look a little bit for a larger angle. So around the last, and then here. Let's take it from a larger angle so that you can see better. So I came in here, so I want to come the other way around, like this. And now there's a cross, and yet another cross. I would also like to add that for the first cross, the reason why I am making it between the second and the third peg is because I need a bit of length of yarn for the part when I will be putting the warp onto my loom. So you will get the idea when we get to this part. So now let's jump to the second cross. So the second cross has another purpose than the first one. So this one, its only purpose is to help me keep track of where I am at in the warping. So its only purpose is to help me count how many warp threads I have warped on the warping board. So to do this, what I do, I make bundles of 10 warp threads. So I make 10 warp threads in one side of the peg, and then I make another bundle of 10 warp threads on the other side, and so on. So let's check out how I do it. So the second cross that I'm making at the end of the warp. Now I will keep on warping. So I did. And now because I've done already one bundle of 10 threads, I want to do another bundle, start a new one. So I will go around the last peg, but now I will be referring to the second peg because of the third, it's kind of a corner one, it's harder to use. So I'm using the second peg now. So for all the other threads, I was going on the right side of the peg. So now I want to go on the left side of the peg. And for this one, it will be the same. So now I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 10 threads on the other side. So I continue like this all the way through. So I make bundles of 10, and after each time I've done one bundle of 10 warp threads, I change the way around this peg. I'm doing a third bundle, so I will go around the last peg, and this time I will go from the outside of the peg. So the last one I was here, the last bundle, and this one I wanted to go from the right side of the peg here. So again, on the right side. Also, for the second cross, I make bundles of 10 ends or 10 warps end, but this is a very arbitrary number. So for this project, I thought that it was a nice number to round it up to, but really you could use whatever number that works best for you. Sometimes, in some cases, I would do bundles of 12 warp threads. Sometimes I could maybe do less. So really, it's up to you what works best for you, but I always find that counting by multiple of 10 makes it much easier. So please note that this second cross doesn't really look like a cross. I know, I just cannot wrap my head around making a nice cross in between only 2 pegs, but still for this second cross, the only goal of this cross is to keep track of how many threads I have warped, and the way it is made, it can do just that, so it's perfect for this. But I know there are better ways to make a cross right there. I just make it this way and it works. So since every time I'm going around this peg from another angle, so here's one bundle of 10, 2, we have 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now I have 6 bundles of 10 threads. So I know that I have 60 threads right now. Also, here, when I'm done doing one bundle and I want to make sure that I have the 10 threads, from here I can also count them. So I know those. So 2, 4, that's 6, 8, and 10. So I can always double check to make sure that I have warped enough for one bundle. And now I know that I have 60 threads here. So now I have done a few repeats of my 10 bundles. So I have 60 ends on the loom, and as you can see, my pegs are starting to be a little full. So what I highly recommend is to do several warps, so several bundles of warp. Otherwise, when the pegs get too big, it's a little messy and we don't like this. Also, when we transpose a warp onto the loom, you will see why, because we need to hold this into our hand. So it is also easier to have the warp separate in different bundles. So because it's a big warp, I might be doing at least 2 bundles. I could have done 3 bundles. I think 2 will be enough for me, but if I were to feel very uncomfortable with this, I could make more bundles. So I will fix the end and show you how I take it off. So here are my scissors, so I just cut it and I attach it. is where we have the cross that we made in the beginning of the warp. So this will be very important to keep until we put this onto the loom. So this is why we are going to fix it. With another piece of scrap yarn, what I do is that I go underneath on one side, so you see and try not to hold on to the guide here, because the guide I'm going to use again for my other bundle. So I'm trying to get only the warp. So here I took all of one side, and I'm going to go get all of the warps on the other side of the cross as well. So now you can see here, this is my scrap yarn. So it takes all the yarn of the cross here, and I'm just gonna make a bunny loop. So I want this knot not to be too hard to undo, because I'm gonna have to undo it later, but it needs to be strong enough to keep them in place. I will also use a bit of scrap yarn here at the very beginning of the warp. Again, I go like this, and now I have them all, and then do a little bunny loop. So I will also fix here with a scrap yarn, but I don't need to fix into the cross, because, well, it's not really a nice cross, you would say. It's not really a cross. And also I don't need it for further on. I am simply going to go here. So this will secure the warp threads just a little bit so that they don't move around so much. I have secured the very beginning of the warp, the very end of the warp, and I have secured my cross. So I would also want to put a few more scrap yarn all the way through the warp to secure it too, and make sure it doesn't tangle too much. It will tangle though, it probably will. Some yarns are more tangly than other, but this will help just keep it a little bit more in place. And one more here. Always, I try as much as I can not to take the the guide, because I'm going to use it for the second part of the warp. And now bunny hairs, and there we have it. Take it off the loom. I want this cross to be the last thing, the end of the work, because this is where I'm going to start over. So this needs to, I'm going to start by taking this off first. Woo! And you see? And then I'm going to do a little bit like if I was doing crochet. So I will just make loops and go grab to make another loops like this. It's coming with us. Like that. And this is where, and I need the cross here at the end. So now I have my first bundle of warp. So I've kept track on a little note, on a little pad here, how much warp there's in it, but I still want to make sure that I don't mess it up, because sometimes I get distracted. So I know that there are 60 threads in there. So with some masking tape, I simply wrote 60, and I will tape it on the cross. So later on, if I do something else, I come back to it, and I'm not sure how much I put in my first. Well, now I know there are 60 threads in this one. So this is pretty secure like that, so I'm just gonna let it lean over a chair for a while, and while I do the other part of the warp, and then I will come back with it. Alright, so now I have my first warp bundle, which has 60 ends. Now I have 74 ends here, so there's only one more end that I need to wind onto the board to have my total of 135 ends. Usually when we direct warp, we would always have even numbers because we pull loops, and this is 2 threads. And here, if we always make the way in and out of the board, we will also have even numbers, but now I have the luxury to do the final thread for the 135th one, and I can stop it right here. So what this means is that let me just cut it and attach it. So that odd number end means that I will make sure that my first thread of my warp is in one hole and my last one is also in one hole. So this should help also to have nicer selvages. So that is a little trick, nothing very complicated, but at the end it's cool to have. So now I have used the whole first ball and I have only barely touched the second ball. So I have all of this left for the weft. So now we have done the most complicated part, I think, in my eyes. So now we can jump onto a less complicated part, but the one that needs a little more dexterity. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take our cross, and I'm gonna take off the masking tape I put in, and we are going to put it in our fingers. So the goal here is to have a good grip of the cross. So as you can see, I put the two upper parts between my finger, my index finger and my middle finger, and then the other part between those two guys here. And the rest, there's one that's hanging in my palm and the other one is like that by my thumb. So this way the cross is very secure and will not move. I have cut the end of this, so those were loops and they were still hanging together in loops, and now they really are two loose ends patches. So one here, and now this is the moment of fate. So now I'm going to unsecure my cross, so now the threads will be a little bit more looser. So when starting this step, it's good if you have to go to the toilet, if you are hungry a little bit, go do that and then come back to this, because once we start dealing with the cross here, and when we start taking the threads here to put them into the heddle, there's no turning back. We can pause it, but there's always a little risk of tangle and a risk of messing everything up, so it's better to do it from start to finish. So now I'm simply untying my knot. And now I have committed to it, I need to do this till the end. So basically what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take one thread at a time and make it go through my heddle. And at the same time I am threading the heddle, so I'm gonna go into one hole, one slot, one hole, one slot. So this is one step we will not have to do at the end if we compare to direct warping. And because of the cross, my threads were pretty much in order, because I always put them, well, they are not pretty much, they are in order. They were always one on top of the other, and this order was kept here. So let's start this. I find that it helps if I put my heddle in the back spot, in the second heddle spot, to thread them. I find that they have, because if I put them here, it's somehow the way I lean on it, it just always want to fall down, and if I put it in the back, I'll lean on it like that, but it doesn't really want to fall down. So maybe it's just me, but I find it helps if I put it into the back spot for the second heddle. So now I'm gonna take the first thread here, and I'm going to make it go through the first hole on the left. I'm left-handed, so I'm always tended to start by the left side, but it doesn't matter if you want to start by the right side. And now I am up to the second one, so I take it, I put my thumb there or my fingers just to keep that secure, and I make it go through the slot next to it. And so now this is my next thread. So here we have the cross. So it's pretty clear which one I am at. Now it's a bit dark, so I hope it shows well on the camera, but it's pretty clear that this is the next thread I need to take. And now I need to put it into the slot. Now let's look back. The next one, it's this one. Oops. Put it into the hole. Now that I have a few threads that are already threaded, I will just do a little knot, a very loose knot, just to make sure that the ends are secure and that if my heddle would fall down, then the threads will not go unthread themselves. They will not come out of the heddle, so this secures them until I get to the second step, which is tying them onto the back apron. So I'm not there yet, so simply a little knot like that and it's fine. So we'll keep going. So here, this is why we do need a little bit more dexterity for this part, because I am using both my hands to help me thread the put the yarn into the holes and the slats here, while still holding the cross here and making sure that nothing messes up. And the bigger the cross is, so the more threads there's in it, or the bigger the yarn, the harder it is, because then we get our hands pretty full. So this is one of the reasons why it's very good to have to make more than one bundle of warp and do them step by step, so one bundle at a time. Because I think that if I had the 135 ends in my hand right now, I would really have no fun. I would probably think it's way too complicated and way too big to handle this all. Some things also that I like to do, every now and then I just check the holes and I check the slot to make sure quickly that I haven't missed any slot or hole. So this could happen while doing this technique, and it has happened to me, so I like to double check every 2 inches or so. If this were to happen, I would just correct it by putting one warp that I have in my hand into the missing slot or hole. I have reversed the loom because I'm gonna work from the back, so I need to attach all of those warp threads to the back apron. So I've put them here to show, but I'm just gonna take one bundle at a time. Here's the back apron, here's a bundle. So I usually attach them with bundles about the same of what I would do when I tie it onto the front apron, so about 1 inch, 1.5 inches. And then I try to make them as equal as possible, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. If there are a few that are a bit longer than the other one, it doesn't really matter, just not by a few inches, because then it would be uneven at the end too. See, here I have some threads that are more longer than the other one, so I just pick the shorter one up and I try to just make them be a bit more equal, like this, and it's gonna come out okay at the end. So this for me is equal enough. I have my my bundle, and I have my 2 ends of this bundle. So I take one of the end and I make it go underneath the apron, and the other one is still here on the top, and I make somewhat of a surgeon knot with the strand on my left hand. This one's gonna stay straight, and the one on in my right end is gonna go around the left one twice. So here, this is the right one that has moved around the left one twice, and then I make the left one go around the right one twice from the top. So 1 and 2. So now this is what I have. So it looks a little like this. Right now it looks like a pretzel. So we see one thread, so they intertwine twice. Here 2 rolls and here 2 rolls, and then I just pull here, and this becomes a very, very, very strong knot. So even though if I would have a lot of tension here, it will not break. So let me do a second one. Here, this will be my first bundle, so the threads are equal enough. And now this will be my second bundle. Just gotta, so just have to make sure that it goes around the apron, so that the knot will be, when we make the knot, we are above the apron to make sure that it is knotted to it. If we just make the knot and don't consider the back apron, then we just made a knot in the air and it will not be holding on to anything. So just make sure that you go around this. And now I will make the knot again. So the right one will go twice around the left one. I grab it back, and now I make the left one, which is now the right, twice again around the other one. Like this. So here, this is what it looks like, and I pull. I try not to leave too much of yarn here, because this will become waste yarn. It is inevitable, but I try to have as little as I can. Alright, so now most of the warping is done. Now we just need to roll this onto the back beam. The worst is behind us now. We've done the worst part of indirect warping. Now it's the same as usual. So let's do this. On the back of the loom, it's a really big mess. While doing indirect warping, I find that it's hard not to have this mess. If you have tricks not to don't have it so messy here, please let me know in the comments down below. So far this is the best way that I have found to do it, so I just try to comb everything before winding onto the back beam so that it's not so messy. Make it, so one way to do it, I try to make sure that the knot I made is on the apron or very, very close to the apron, and then I comb it like this, so that it will be ready for the next part. Not satisfied of what I have here, so I will start rolling this onto the back beam. So first I'm going to comb all the threads and make sure that I have an even grip on my threads. If there's any threads that are looser or patches of threads that I find are looser, I will just try to regroup and retake my grip. So now it looks pretty good, so I'll start winding it up. So now this is it for today's video. We now have a fully warped loom, so it's ready to be woven on. So now I'll be off to weaving this scarf and making the video for next week. And I really hope you like it. I'd like to know if you have other techniques, or if you do something else when you indirect warp your loom. So if you do, please leave me a message in the comments down below to this video. And I hope to see you next week. Bye bye.